"I didn't mean to startle you," she apologized. "Startle, hell," I blurted. "You scared me out of my shoes." I dug her purse. Besides the usual female junk, she had a wallet containing a couple of charge account plates, a driver's license, and a hospital card, all made out to Miss Martha Franklin. Miss Franklin was about 24, and she was a strawberry blonde with the pale skin and blue eyes that go with the hair. I gathered that she didn't belong there any more than I did. "I don't, Mr. Hammond," she said. So Martha Franklin was a mental sensitive. "I am," she told me, "and that's how I came to be here." "I'm an Esper. You'll have to explain in the words of one syllable because I can't read you." "I was not far away when you cut loose with that field piece of yours," she said flatly, "so I read your intention to come here. I've been following you at mental range ever since." "Why?" "Because there is something in that safe I want very much." I looked at her again. She did not look like the type to get into awkward situations. She colored slightly and said, "One indiscretion doesn't make a tramp, Mr. Hammond." I nodded. "Want it intact or burned?" I asked. "Burned, please," she said, smiling weakly at me for my intention. I smiled back. On my way to Rambaugh's bedroom, I dug the rest of the thug's safe, but there wasn't anything there that would give me an inkling of why he was gunning for me. I came back with one of his needle rays and burned the contents of the safe to a black char. I stirred up the ashes with the nose of the needler and left it in the safe after wiping it clean on my handkerchief. "Thank you, Mr. Hammond," she said quietly. "Maybe I can answer your question. Rambaugh was probably after you because of me." "Huh?" "I've been paying Rambaugh blackmail for about 4 years. This morning I decided to stop it, and looked your name up in the telephone book. Rambaugh must have read me do it." "Ever think of the police?" I suggested. "Of course. But that is just as bad as not paying off. You end up all over the front pages anyway. You know that." "There's a lot of argument on both sides," I supposed. "But let's finish this one over a bar. We're crowding our luck here. In the eyes of the law, we're just a couple of nasty break-ins." "Yes," she said simply. We left Rambaugh's apartment together, and I handed Martha into my car and took off. It struck me as we were driving that mental sensitivity was a good thing in spite of its limitations. A woman without mental training might have every right to object to visiting a bachelor apartment at 2 o'clock in the morning. But I had no firm plans for playing up to Martha Franklin. I really wanted to talk this mess out and get it squared away. This she could read, so I was saved the almost impossible task of trying to convince an attractive woman that I really had no designs upon her beautiful white body. I was not all that cold to the idea, but Martha did not seem to be the pushover type. "Thank you, Steve," she said. "Thanks for nothing," I told her with a short laugh. "Them's my sentiments." "I like your sentiments, that's why I'm here. Maybe we can get our heads together and figure something out." I nodded and went back to my driving, feeling pretty good now. A man does not dig his own apartment. He expects to find it the way he left it. He digs in the mailbox on his way towards it, and he may dig in his refrigerator to see whether he should stop for beer or whatever else, because these things save steps. But nobody really expects to find trouble in his own home, especially when he's coming in at 3 o'clock in the morning with a good-looking woman. They were smart enough to come with nothing deadly in their hands, so I had no warning until they stepped out from either side of my front door and lifted me into my living room by the elbows. They hurled me into an easy chair with a crash. When I stopped bouncing, one of the gorillas was standing in front of me, about as tall as the Washington Monument as seen from the sidewalk in front. He was looking at my .45 with careful curiosity. "What gives?" I demanded. The crumb in front of me leaned down and gave me a back and forth that yanked my head around. I didn't say anything, but I thought how I'd like to meet the buzzard in a dark alley with my gun in my fist. Martha said, "They're friends of Rambaugh, Steve, and they're a little afraid of that prehistoric cannon you carry." The bird in front of Martha gave her a 1-2 across the face. That was enough for me. I came up out of my chair, lifting my fist from the floor and putting my back and thigh muscles behind it. It should have taken his head off, but all he did was grunt, stagger back, dig his heels in, and then come back at me with his head down. I chopped at the bridge of his nose, but missed and almost broke my hand on his hard skull. Then the other guy came charging in, and I flung out a side chop with my other hand and caught him on the wrist. But Rhine training can't do away with the old fact that two big tough men can wipe the floor with one big tough man. I didn't even take long enough to muss up my furniture. I had the satisfaction of mashing a nose and cracking my hand against a skull again before the lights went out. When I came back from Mars, I was sitting on a kitchen chair facing a corner. My wrists and ankles were taped to the arms and legs of the chair. I dug around. They had Martha taped to another chair in the opposite corner, and the two gorillas were standing in the middle of the room, obviously trying to think. So was I. There was something that smelled about this mess. Peter Rambaugh was a mental, and he should have been sensitive enough to keep his take low enough so that it wouldn't drive Martha into thinking up ways and means of getting rid of him. Even so, he shouldn't have been gunning for me, unless there was a lot more to this than I could dig. "What gives?" I asked sourly. There was no answer. The thug with my .45 took out the clip and removed a couple of slugs. He went into the kitchen and found my pliers and came back teasing one of the slugs out of its casing. The other bird lit a cigarette. The bird with the cartridge poured the powder from the shell into the palm of my hand. I knew what was coming, but I couldn't wiggle my fingers much, let alone turn my hand over to dump the stuff out. The other guy planted the end of the cigarette between my middle fingers, and I had to squeeze hard to keep the hot end up. My fingers began to ache almost immediately, and I was beginning to imagine the flash of the flame and the fierce wave of pain that would strike when my tired hand lost its pep and let the cigarette fall into that little mound of powder. "Stop it," said Martha. "Stop it!" "What do they want?" I gritted. "They won't think it," she cried. The bright red on the end of the cigarette grayed with ash, and I began to wonder how long it would be before a fleck of hot ash would fall. How long it would take for the ash to grow long and top-heavy and then fall into the powder, and whether or not the ash would be hot enough to touch it off. I struggled to keep my hands steady, but they were trembling. I felt the cigarette slip a bit and clamped down tight with my aching fingers. Martha pleaded again. "Stop it! Let us know what you want and we'll do it." "Anything," I promised rashly. Even if I managed to hold that deadly fuse tight, it would eventually burn down to the bitter end. Then there would be a flash, and I'd probably never hold my hand around a gun butt again. I'd have to go looking for this pair of lice with my gun in my left, if they didn't try the same trick on my other hand. I tried to shut my mind on that notion, but it was no use. It slipped. But the chances were that this pair of closed-mouth hot boys had considered that idea before. "Can you dig 'em, Martha?" "Yes, but not deep enough. They're both concentrating on that cigarette and making mental bets when it will—" Her voice trailed off. A wisp of ash had dropped and my mental howl must have been loud enough to scorch their minds. It was enough to stop Martha, at any rate. But the wisp of ash was cold and nothing happened except my spine got coldly wet and sweat ran down my face and into my mouth. The palm of my hand was sweating too, but not enough to wet the little pile of powder. "Look," I said in a voice that sounded like a nutmeg grater. "Rambaugh was a louse and he tried to kill me first. If it's revenge you want, why not talk it over?" "They don't care what you did to Rambaugh," said Martha. "They didn't come here to practice torture," I snapped. "They want something big, and the only guy I know mixed up with Peter Rambaugh is Scarman himself." "Scarman!" blurted Martha. Scarman was a big shot who lived in a palace about as lush as the Taj Mahal, in the middle of a fenced-in property big enough to keep him out of the mental range of most peepers. Scarman was about as big a louse as they came, but nobody could put a finger on him because he managed to keep himself as clean as a ray-gunned needle. I was expecting a clip on the skull for thinking the things I was thinking